Greetings and salutations, welcome to yet another book review. This one's a bit different to many of my previous reviews on YouTube in that it is, I have to admit, most of mine have been classic science fiction recently, but this one is not. This one is crime, mystery, fiction, audiobook, and it's Australian contemporary. So it's a whole lot of things. I guess it's most adequately described as a mystery thriller, and a few years ago I was reading a lot of Australian fiction. For a while there it was the one genre I read in most widely, because I hadn't read any for a while. I was picking that up, and after a while I found that I guess I'd read enough. I moved on to a different genre. Omnivorous reader, right? I gave this channel that title for a reason. I need variation in my reading. But Broken Bay by Margaret Hickey came along at just the right moment. I was more than ready for crime or thriller. I was more than ready for that Australian voice that is really different. If you're not Australian or you haven't read much Australian fiction, there's a distinct voice to it that you can't really confuse with English or American or any other style of literature. And that comes through even more so in an audiobook where the narrator is trying for that Australian lick. Now, Margaret Hickey, I don't know that I've ever read anything of hers before. I might have, but I'm not sure. Apparently Broken Bay is the third in a series in which she has the same character. That's Detective Sergeant Margaret Hickey. In this particular book, he's actually gone on holiday to a small South Australian coastal town called Broken Bay. It's a limestone area, so you've got the ocean and you've got the surfers, which is true, but Australia's also known for a lot of sinkholes, or cenotes as they're known. You get amazing crystal clear water through all of that southern part of Australia, extending from South Australia through to West Australia on the Nullarbor. And you get caves in which the water is, so you've got cave diving. I'm not a cave diver, I might mention, but I am a keen scuba diver. I've been diving scuba since the early 90s. I've got over 100 dives, etc, etc. But cave diving is a different genre. Just because you know how to scuba dive doesn't mean that you can just go and dive in a cave. It's a different thing. So I was attracted to this, partly the Australian crime thriller, partly the location, and partly the diving. It's like I thought that would be interesting. And it was. Broken Bay's got a very Australian feel. Any Australian will get a lot of it. Maybe someone who isn't Australian might struggle, not so much with slang. The internet has got abundant YouTube videos about how Australians have got slang terms like dunny, etc, whatever. But aside from the slang, which is indeed its own thing, there's a feel to an Australian speech, patterns of behaviour and stuff. And in Broken Bay, it's really strong. It comes through well. Now, I listened to an audiobook that worked well. I do listen to a few audiobooks. I haven't reviewed any recently, but I'm fond of them, especially when I'm driving a lot. Police frown on you holding a book in one hand while you're driving with the other, so audiobooks are a good way of bridging that long drive. The narrator was Henry Nixon. I don't know much about him. He's got quite a few books that he's narrated on Audible. I enjoyed his narration, though it took a while for me to get used to it. And it took a while, I think, for him to get into it. So I think Nixon was strongly emphasizing that old boys, gritty Aussie style, which is a bit of a trope. In the same way, I suppose, that any country you've got tropes of what the accent is or the intonation. And if someone who isn't from that country tries to replicate it, they don't always do too well. Australian's harder to replicate than anything else. But in this one, Nixon is definitely Australian. I'd say definitely Australian, at a guess. He's overemphasizing the grit. And At first, it took a while to really get into it. Like anyone who's going for a stereotype, there's a certain inclination to sneer at the over stereotyping that's happening. I had a bit of that happening. I think his accent calmed down and I got more used to it as time progressed. So our main character, Margaret, is meant to be from Adelaide. No, not from Adelaide. South Australia, but some small town where he's the only cop. He's a good character. I enjoyed him. He's come for a few days holiday in Broken Bay. His sister's arranged for him to go on an ocean fishing trip, and that leads us into the story. He's on this ship that used to be a working fishing boat, lobster, etc., for Phil Sinclair and his wife, I'm gonna say, is it Marjorie? Judy, I think it's Judy. And their daughter Geraldine. They're out on this boat. Mark's never been out on the ocean much. He's terribly sick. He isn't enjoying himself. But that gives us an excellent introduction to Mark, if we haven't met him before, and I hadn't, and to the Sinclairs, who are a major portion of this book. So he's taken these few days holiday in Broken Bay at precisely the wrong time. At the same time he's there, a renowned cave diver called Maya Rennick is invited to explore a sinkhole that's just opened up on one of the farmer's properties. Frank Doyle is farming, is a dairy farmer, cows, dairy, I think it's a dairy farmer, on this limestone area. It's very fertile, the farm's doing well. They discover the sinkhole, and Frank's always got his eye on the next dollar. He knows that cave diving is a huge industry. He invites world famous Maya Rennick to map this sinkhole. She goes down. We see the dive through her eyes, but when she drowns, Margaret is pulled out of his holiday to be part of the investigation. When spoilers, non-spoilers. Is this going to be a spoiler? No, it probably shouldn't be a spoiler. Okay, so I'll just say that they bring in police divers and professional divers to retrieve Maya's body. But when they get out, they've got a surprise. The body they found isn't Maya's. It's been there a lot longer. And it's revealed that that diver is probably a young girl from the Sinclair family with whom Mark went out on the boat, who went missing 20 years earlier. And that sets up for this small town intrigue, because you've got Mark, who was already there and had already formed some connections. You've got the diver who died, and there's more murders later on, or another murder later on. And you follow Mark as he goes through, and he gently unpicks the relationships and the small town relationships, the families, their interactions, their backgrounds, their feuds, their anger and their connections. So the girl who died, her mother had died by, it was judged to be suicide. Not everyone thought that, off the cliffs of the town. There's a whole huge deep intrigue as all this decades long friendships, loyalties, enmities and ambiguities slowly get unraveled by Margaret. In that sense, it's a really good mystery. The crimes are good crimes, the mystery is good mystery. The slow unpicking of it's very pleasant to follow. I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy the cave diving. Now, beyond a doubt, Margaret Hickey, who wrote this, is not a cave diver. She's a novelist. Clearly she's written a couple of other Margaretes. I'm 99% certain that there was no cave diving or any other type of diving involved in those. I'm pretty sure she did a lot of research for this. It's actually somewhere in the introduction, I think, somewhere, it names an Australian Cave Diving Association as a source of a lot of information. And as I said, I'm not a cave diver, but I do watch the YouTube Dive Talk with Gus and Woody. If you haven't and you're interested in diving, head over to Dive Talk, Gus and Woody. They put on a fabulous show. So much information about cave diving, all of which conflicts with Broken Bay. So, yes, Australian association is going to be different from an English association or from an American association. But there's going to be a lot of similarities. As I've seen Gus say on a couple of other shows, you can, if you're a cave diver in America, you can go anywhere in the world and cave dive. There's not going to be a huge amount of difference in equipment, in what you do. And cave diving is dangerous in ways that scuba diving isn't. Very few scuba divers dive solo. There is a special solo qualification, but most of us don't do that. Not, despite the temptation of being able to dive all on your own on your day off when no one else wants to dive, diving has a hazard level to it. And diving alone is dangerous because these small things that can be a minor hazard with a buddy can kill you if you dive alone. And that, I believe, is even more so in cave diving, where you have to have a backup torch, you have to have a backup air supply, you have to have guide ropes and backup guide ropes, all of these things that you have to have, and with backups. And here, Margaret Hickey has Maya Rennick diving all on her own in this cave that's just opened up, that has no guide ropes. This is the first investigative dive, and she's diving alone, and then she goes through a squeeze. I'm sorry, it just seems batshit crazy to me that any experienced diver would do something so ridiculous. Maya's been invited to explore this sinkhole. She didn't have to do that on her own. There was no reason why she should or would do that on her own. There's no common sense to that. And not blaming Margaret Hickey here, and I'm not even saying that she's wrong, but I briefly touched onto this Australian Cave Diving Association where she was getting information from, and I didn't see any indication that they dive alone. There's a lot about being independent and self-reliant. Yes, you can't go on a dive and expect your buddy to take care of you and hold you by the hand. You need to be self-reliant, you need to be independent, you need to be qualified. But does that mean going all alone into a sinkhole where no one has ever been before? I argue not. And that bothered me a lot about the first part. In fact, let's be honest, the first chapter I was so indignant at the idea of a book promoting the idea of a cave diver going into an unknown cave on their own that I nearly put it down and didn't go. I'm glad I went on with it. The book is good. The character is good, the narration is good. I'm still violently indignant about the fact that Maya Rennick went down into that cave on her own. But, you know, whatever. Diving does feature a lot. I like the way South Australia is featured and the limestone cave areas. It's been a long time since I've been to South Australia. It was fun. I enjoyed that. Margaret Hickey has written us a good yarn, I've got to say. It's a good story, the crime is good, all the characters and how they mesh together, that's a real bonus to the book. Her need to pepper in dive terms that I've never heard in my life before. I'm sure someone somewhere does use them, but these things that she seems to be implying that every diver knows, it's like, no, I don't. It ain't necessarily so, Margaret. It just ain't. So yes, if you like crime, mystery, fiction, audiobook, Australia, contemporary mystery thriller, thoroughly recommend it. It's probably not a 5-star for me, but it's definitely a good 3.5, 4-star, and you can't go past that. Margaret Hickey is an award-winning author. She's from northeast Victoria, so she's kind of from that southern part of Australia. I would consider going and reading her 2 previous books. If you're a completionist, they're called Cutter's End and Stone Town. I know I've had Cutter's End recommended to me a few times. I don't think I've read it yet. So, yes. Cave diver goes down to investigate a completely new and unexplored cave system with no buddy and no backup. What? lot. But in every other way, good book. I do recommend. Thank you for watching. Audiobooks are awesome. Never neglect them when you've got long drives or long trips where you can't be reading an actual book. And read good books, read omnivorously, and talk to me about the books you read, because I like that sort of stuff.